All right, well, Vinnie, thanks for having me here as we talk about manufacturing and COVID-19 and the impact. And I've got a little slide deck here that I'm going to manufacturing and our perspective on what has been going on the last few months. So a while ago, me and our CEO at Plex, Bill Brody, we were having a conversation back in March, first when COVID-19 was first really hitting and becoming an impactful thing. And we were asking ourselves, what should we do and what can we do to help what we see going on around the world at that time? And we had customers, our manufacturing customers, who were pivoting to manufacture things like face masks and sanitizers. But what could Plex provide? We're not a manufacturer. We provide software. We build ERP and MES and IoT. We build those systems for our manufacturing customers to use. So the question is, what can we do to help? And then we realized the one thing that we do have is data. Because we're in the cloud, and we've been in the cloud since the beginning, we have almost 20 years of hardcore manufacturing data. And we have that data across multiple industries that our customers serve, automotive, general discrete, chemicals, food and beverage, electronics, aerospace and defense. So we have all of this data, and we're adding to that data over 8 billion transactions every single day. Now, a transaction would be anything that one of our manufacturing customers does, like make a shipment, or create a journal entry, or make a production record, or scan a barcode. Every single one of those things that it does is a transaction. So we're collecting a huge amount of data real time, and we can watch and analyze this real time. And so what that means is we had and have this ringside seat to what's happening to our customer base around the world. And so then we realized, okay, so we have this data, and we decided to build a resource center, basically a COVID-19 resource center, showing weekly the impact of COVID-19 on manufacturing. And we stepped into this lightly. We didn't want to come across like we were happy that this was happening or trying to take advantage of the situation because of the loss of life and the economic impact. But at the same time, we felt we had something to offer. So we actually went live about 4 days after that conversation we had in the middle of March. And part of that discussion, though, was what are the actual metrics and pieces of data that we can show? Now, Plex, being an ERP and MES system, we have hundreds of metrics across our product line that we can show. So the question is, which ones should we utilize that will give us compelling information across the entire pandemic? And we settled on a production metric. Now, a production record is created every time a container of production becomes full and then moves away from the work center. So you think of our customers in various industries. We have customers that put engines on pallets. They put chocolate in a box, or they put metal washers in a bin. So all of those things are being produced, and when that unit or that container, I should say, fills up, we create a production record. And that production record records everything that happened to those actual pieces that were made, who made it, the date and time, the part, all of that relevant information. But we actually focused on the number of production records that were created, because that would be normalized across all of our customers and directionally consistent as we went through the pandemic. And so that's what we started measuring. And so what you see here is actually the result of that work. And this is actually looking at our production across our entire global customer set over the last 6 months. And you can see some really fascinating things that have happened through the pandemic to our manufacturing customers. For instance, you see there at the middle of March, you see this incredible drop in production, like a cliff. And I've been in manufacturing for 30 years. I've been through, I don't know how many recessions. I've never seen anything like this, Vinnie. It's just production went, in the space of 4 weeks, went to almost zero for many of our customers. And you can see that huge drop, 81% in 4 weeks. But then we spent a few weeks at the bottom as we were shut down across most of the world. And we started to claw our way back out. And you can see in the 7 weeks following that, we had kind of a very U-shaped recovery, recovering 82% back of what we had lost. And then the recovery starts to take on a more gradual slope, as you can see there at the end of June. Of course, you can see the various holidays, Independence Day and Labor Days accounted for in the data, finally arriving to where we're at today, which is at 102% of our pre-COVID levels. So you can see, what's that?
That's pretty impressive.
It is impressive. It's been a milestone that we've been fighting for, and we're not claiming any sort of victory yet. There's lots of runway to go here, but it is a huge milestone to get to this point, which is really encouraging and really exciting to be able to see this.
And now, Jerry, you can see this by geography and by industry, right?
Yes, we can, and we can look at some of that data, because when you start to slice and dice by those various filters, you can actually see some really cool and interesting stories. For instance, let's take a look at Mexico. Mexico's got a graph similar to what you just saw, but when you look at it closer, you can see some really interesting things. The first thing is Mexico's actually at 109% right now of their pre-COVID levels, and that probably speaks to some of the increase in production and business that they're getting as China has struggled, and manufacturers are trying to find places that can quickly ramp up and make the production that is required. But what's also interesting is when you take, I took the Johns Hopkins data that we're all familiar with, the COVID-19 data that we've all been looking at, and I superimpose that on top of the Mexico production data that we were obtaining. And you see a really interesting story there. You can see that during the worst of the pandemic, as their cases are increasing, their production is increasing at the same time. And I just think that speaks to the resilience and the ability of manufacturers to figure out how to do things in the midst of a huge crisis. There's an interesting downturn.
That is outstanding. That speaks to humanity's resilience.
It does. It really does. It speaks to coming together and just figuring out how are we going to do this in a way that it benefits our employees, keeps them safe, and helps the economy. You see an interesting downturn there in beginning of July, and we suspect that's from some local shutdowns trying to contain the virus. But then as the virus starts to ebb and go on the downturn, you see the increase continuing across the rest of the Mexican data set. So manufacturers are tough, they're durable, there's no quit in any manufacturer that I've ever known. That's just one of the hallmarks of our customers and manufacturing in general. Very, very interesting data set here, just looking at the United States. The blue line in this data set is the current production for 2020, very similar to what we've just been talking about. And you can see we are, oops, I'm going to back up there. Sorry, I hit the wrong key. We're at just over 100% of our pre-COVID levels. Now, along with the blue line, we have an orange line, which is actually the 2019 production across our U.S. customers. And just the interesting thing here is you can see starting there in June or July, you can see that the shape and slope of the data is very similar in 2020 to what it was in 2019. And it just speaks to getting back to a little bit more of what we would consider normal. And I know we're still a long way from what we'd all want to be normal, but there is some normalization of the data between 2020 and 2019, which is, again, encouraging. Now, the flip side of that is taking a look at China. China's had a very different and interesting journey through this pandemic. You can see they had the same cliff as we did, but that happened back in January. And another interesting thing is they only had a week at the bottom before they started their recovery. And they had a very strong recovery. But then we notice they stalled at about 50 to 50% of their pre-pandemic levels. And they were that way for about 4 months. And then just in the last 6 or 7 weeks, they have started to recover again. And we've seen a sharp increase of about 40% in the last 7 weeks. So they are now at about 75%. But it's been interesting to see China go through this as they have struggled to get their footing and get their business back up to where it was. And we suspect some of the lag there in China might account for the increase we actually saw in Mexico as we're trying to, our customers are trying to compensate for that issues that we were seeing in China. So that's fascinating with China. Another way we look at the data is then comparing the various continents. So this is looking at Asia, Europe, and North America. And what this shows, Vinnie, is not just actual production. What we're showing, each data point on this graph shows the percentage of production for that week compared to the height of production before the pandemic hit. In other words, we'll look at these data points right here. You can see at the beginning of January on the left, the teal line, that's China. So all of the points on this China graph are a percentage as compared to that data point, which is the 100% point there in the middle of January. Similar for the red and black, which is Europe and North America, you can see their 100% mark was March 8th, which is the arrow on the right. So all of the data points for Europe and North America are a percentage. What percentage of pre-pandemic production are we at any given time? So now the reason we did that is so we can normalize varying production numbers across the continents and have a consistent metric that we can measure them against each other. So we're measuring a percentage of recovery is basically what we're seeing here.
And you're going to touch on how your customers have used, I mean, this is phenomenal insights. How have your customers used this?
Yeah, I will a little bit towards the end.
Yeah, okay.
What we see here is China, of course, going through the pandemic a couple of months, or I should say Asia going through the pandemic a couple of months before Europe and North America. And then, of course, Europe and North America, the pandemic hit us in March. You can see it hit Europe about a week. You see that little gap there? Europe is in the black. So Europe was about a week before us in their crisis. And then, of course, that continued through the bottom of the pandemic. And then the recovery is similar, with Europe about a week or two ahead of North America. But then we had this very interesting thing happen in June. In June, we had three things happen, or two major things at least. We had Europe and North America surpass China, which was on a downward trend at that time. But at the same exact time, North America caught and passed Europe in their recovery. And it stayed that way until you see the July holiday and shutdowns, those two downturns there immediately following that data point. So it was just an interesting data point in June where we saw all the different continents kind of converge and pass each other all at the same time. And then, of course, you see the big drop in the black production in Europe. That huge drop there is in August. We know those silly Europeans, they're not going to let a good pandemic get in the way of a couple of weeks at the beach, right? So that's their August vacation that all of Europe takes. And then, of course, all three continents are on an upward recovery there towards the last month or so. Just a couple more really fascinating pieces of data. This was one I love. This speaks to what we've been talking about with manufacturers and who they are to a T. So what we see here is two things. The black is the production that we have been talking about, and you see the similar graph there. This shows production over the last 6 months. But the teal shows unique users. So this shows the actual number of users that are using our software. So you can see they had a dip in the number of users, whether those were furloughed or laid off or just weren't working at that time, of course, because of the shutdown. But then you can see when we get here to the end, as we've already discussed, production is at 102% of the pre-COVID levels, but users, employees are only at 92% of the pre-COVID levels. That means our manufacturers have made up about 10% of their efficiency in that time, compensating for the lack of users, but still overachieving with their production during the same time period. And that just speaks to the efficiency and the ability of our customers to overcome a crisis like this.
And automation hasn't kicked in yet, right? So this is just they're getting efficiencies just with fewer users, and it'll get even better as automation kicks in.
Definitely, and I would suspect that automation is starting to kick in here, some of that. But automation takes time. If you're installing cobots, you're installing systems, IoT, and whatnot. So yeah, this is just our customers doing more with less, just by the sheer effort. It's pretty amazing. Last big data set here is just another take on the data. And again, this is just all about stories, right? And different ways to look at the data. And so what you see here is a look at the automotive industry. You talked about being able to filter by industry, so I thought I'd show you a graph on a specific industry. So this is automotive, and what you see here, each orange-blue pair is a customer. So each of those pairs is a customer, and what it's showing is for each customer, the orange shows their average production for the 3 months of the beginning of the year, 2.5 months, the pre-pandemic numbers. So that orange is their average production weekly number from January to March 16th. And then the blue was their production last week. So what you can see is for almost all of our automotive customers, the blue is superseding the orange, meaning they are now operating at a much higher rate than they were pre-pandemic. And you can see some of our customers is literally through the roof. Some of our customers are doing 120, 130%, or some of them even double the amount of production that they were doing in pre-pandemic levels. So this is just another way of looking at the data and actually seeing some really cool and encouraging things that are happening, in this case, in the automotive industry.
So Bill, it's not just used cars that are that have enjoyed a resurgence during the pandemic. It sounds like even new vehicle production seems to be doing pretty well. Yeah.
New production, there's pent-up demand. And again, as I said before, this is why we're not claiming victory yet. I'm sure a lot of that is pent-up demand, and I'm sure that will start to normalize and kind of come down a little bit. Don't know how long that'll be as the world markets and supply chains start to adjust.
And food and beverage has probably been hot all summer, right?
It has. I neglected to put a food and beverage chart in here. The interesting thing about food and beverage is it has been hot, but it's been much more choppy. We've seen a lot of choppiness in the food and beverage as local ordinances and laws have swung back and forth, and people have kind of had different varying degrees of comfort level with going back to restaurants and such. But it's been very interesting watching the bumpiness. But overall, definitely a huge increase.
Do you have enough aerospace data points? Because that would seem to be commercial aerospace probably hasn't been doing as well.
Yeah, it's been doing well. Actually, we've seen all of our industries are doing well. Some of them better than others. So aerospace and defense has been doing well, but not quite as well. I don't have a chart for that one. But they've been doing well, but they are not quite at 100%. I think last I checked, they were at, I want to say 85, 90%. I'd have to double check that.
But the defense sector has probably continued to do well. Commercial side probably hasn't done as well. Yeah. Right,
exactly. So
this is fascinating.
Yeah, so there's just been a huge amount of interest from the press, the analyst community, and it kind of speaks to the fact, a number of years ago I was speaking at an engagement, and I was talking about some of the data we were collecting, and I talked about this data becoming a product because of the cloud. And of course, data has always been a product, right? Marketing's always used data, but this is taking on when I say becoming a product, more than just marketing. This is using the data for real-time value-added benefit to people who are actually on the shop floor, not just executives, but managers, even for individual contributors being able to use this real-time data. And so we're starting to see this nirvana of real insight because of the real-time nature of the data that happens because of the cloud.
What's your customer reaction to this?
A customer reaction is, I think they've been using this mostly as just in a huge encouragement. So when we show this to our cab or to our customers, they're like, okay, we can do this. Other customers are doing this. There is light at the end of the tunnel, and they don't feel alone. And they're able to actually make decisions and business decisions and actually have a platform from which they can say, look, we need to invest in cobots. We need to invest in IoT, and we need to invest in this automation in order to continue this, if we're going to survive. And you combine that with the message that we have seen over and over again, and history has shown that innovation coming out of a downturn always spikes, right? So the question is, are you going to be riding that wave? Are you going to be on top of that? Or are you going to be trying to play catch up? Because this is a time of opportunity, and our best customers are taking advantage of that and actually increasing their production, their activity, their acquisitions, their customers. So it's been fascinating to watch this whole journey.
Jerry, this is fantastic. I'm glad you shared it, because you don't hear much about the good news in the media.
I know.
This is great. This is great to see.
It's been thank you, Vinnie. It's been really cool to watch it. Like I said, a ringside seat, seeing it unfold and trying to shout that from the mountaintops and let everyone know that there is goodness going on.